Again, my name is Matt Rose. I am the Field CISO, as was just communicated, but you're going to be tested during this presentation. I don't just give a lot of bullets and metrics. I like to use pop culture, weird references, and we're going to start with this one. Anybody know what this movie is? Airplane. What is the line from this movie? No, very close. Don't call me Shirley. Well, don't call me Matthew. This is an issue I have. My mother called me Matthew when I was in trouble. I still have PTSD. If middle name came out, then you knew the shit was about to get real. So when I hear Matthew, I tend to shy away because the wooden spoon was coming out. So please call me Matt. Matt is the preferable name. But let's jump into this. Again, I'm going to test you guys with a few things, see how your pop culture movie references are in line with software supply chain things. So what's a presentation without starting with some metrics? I'm not a big proponent of putting up tons of metrics like 75% say this, 25% say this, 63.2% say this. This is just kind of setting the stage for the concept of software supply chain risk, why it's a growing issue. But again, I'm much more visual instead of textual in my thinking. What is changing? Why is software supply chain security becoming such a huge problem? And it's about the foundational way software has changed. And what better way to communicate that with some references? Software was being developed in waterfall years ago, monolith apps that are pushed out once every 3 months, once every 6 months, which was the equivalent of the Flintstones, Fred and Wilma and Barney and Dino. It was still the Stone Age. Now we've moved into the future, and software development, modern DevOps processes, CI/CD orchestration is the Jetsons. Software has updated itself. We still don't have flying cars or robot maids, but we are developing software in a much more modern way, which has created some unknown, some really complicated aspects for not just vulnerabilities, but compromise of the software supply chain itself. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So methodologies change. First reference, anybody know what this movie is or who is the actor in front? He's a lot older now. It's Michael Keaton. What is the movie? The movie's Gung Ho. If anybody's seen Gung Ho, it was about an American auto manufacturer that was struggling, that was bought by the Japanese, and the Japanese methodologies were brought in to streamline, make things better, which is very similar to software supply chain. CI/CD orchestration, cloud native development with microservices architecture is a new religion. It is a new methodology to develop software. So thinking about a reference, it's very hard to find a movie that was about an assembly line, and this is the best one I could find because it is an obscure topic. So if you have not seen it, it's actually a pretty good movie. Very dated, and Michael Keaton's very young here, but it's worth the time if you have to fly. Speaking of that, hopefully my voice holds up because I've been on a 5-week tour around the country talking and presenting, and my voice is starting to go. Next week is my first week that I am not speaking at a conference somewhere in the world, so hopefully my voice, I can already feel it starting to get scratchy. But let's jump in. So let's work smarter, not harder, to address software supply chain issues. My other reference, anybody remember what this is? Can anybody say the opening line? These are the days of our lives. Well, absolutely. So when I was a kid, and I am dating myself, there were two things if you were home sick from school. You probably ended up watching Days of Our Lives in the afternoon as a soap opera and Bob Barker and The Price is Right in the morning. I use this image to represent a software development lifecycle, the hourglass. And I think this is one of the most famous hourglasses in introduction to anything out there. But if you take this hourglass and flip it on its side and squint, and I'm going to explain this in a second, this is reminiscent of pre-production, post-production software development life cycles or DevOps processes. You have a ton of tooling that you're dealing with trying to secure your entire supply chain. So the first one would be the IDEs that your developers develop code in. Your Eclipse, your Visual Studio, Xcode. You're actually writing the code, the first-party code you're writing. Then you have your code repos, Git, GitHub, anything that's storing code. Visual SourceSafe if you're going back, Team Foundation Server, all these things that are basically housing the code. You have your binary repositories for the binaries you're including in your software. You have your CI orchestration tooling from Chef, Puppet, Ansible, Circle CI, Jenkins, all the building of the software itself. You have the build system itself. This is the MS build environment logo, so the build itself that lies underneath the CI orchestration. And then you have the open source repos, the PyPis, the NPMs that are storing those open source. These are all a lens of security risk, and they're all very important. But again, we've just gone through 6 areas that are very different, have different risks, and have many opportunities for your software supply chain to be compromised. If you move over to the right, you're going to deploy this application that you're building or this piece of software to the cloud environment, to a container, to a data center. Again, another lens of risk. But there is one snapshot in time. It's that inflection point of the sideways hourglass that your post-compilation of whatever you're building, pre-deployment, is the best place, the final exam, to check for software supply risk, or software security supply risk. So looking at the DLLs, the WAR files, the ISOs, whatever you're creating, that is the culmination of all your work. Even if you've done all the best testing with best of breed technologies, star AST technologies, I like to call them, your SAS, DAST, IAS, RASP, SCA, you're going to basically have something that, if you look at that lens, that's what people are using. And I'm going to jump into the details of software supply chain attacks in a second that kind of shines a light on that. How many people understand this, familiar with this type of concept? Like, there is that one point that you have the culmination of all your work. Yep. Think about that. And if you're doing testing on the source code, you're doing testing on the open source packages, you're not looking at the complete picture. So, absolutely. Yep, exactly. So thinking about application security testing tooling, I'm not bashing any AST tooling. I've been, again, in this industry almost 20 years. My background is primarily in SAST. I was one of the first employees at Fortify back in the day, which was one of the first enterprise SaaS solutions. I was one of the first employees at Checkmarx in the US, so I've seen a lot of change. I've seen the processes of developing software and application change rapidly. But again, when you think about the tooling, and again, I'm using pop culture references, if people get these guys, as I build out the slide, I'll give you a gold star. So you have your APIs, the APIs that are intersecting your applications with other applications for functionality, for data. And then you have API scanning as an AST solution to look for rogue APIs, misconfigured APIs, secrets. You have the source code itself, which I just mentioned as SAST. You have open source packages that you're scanning with software composition analysis. Again, one lens of risk. You have a running application, which is basically scanned through dynamic application security testing or manual pen tests. You have the QA environment where you have interactive application security testing, looking at risk from an inside-out standpoint. And then you have that production environment, which is runtime application self-protection, which is a web application firewall as part of the application itself. All of these things are important, but they do not give you 100% coverage of software supply chain risk, because a lot of these are looking at OWASP top 10 type things, SQL injection, cross-site scripting, privilege escalation, these type of things. But all these little robots do actually combine into one giant robot. Does anybody know who the robots are and what they are? We have Devastator. And what are the individual robots called? The Constructicons, yes. So it's a sum of the whole. The parts, all the little robots become one big robot, which creates a new lens of risk that people are not looking at. So you can look at for SQL injection or cross-site scripting or issues at runtime or issues in static code. But when it's all brought together, this is where you're looking for malware. Malware is the key to supply chain risk. There's different ways that it can get into applications, different mechanisms. We'll talk about that in a second. But understanding malware and how to remediate that. Understanding the diff of release. What's changed? What files have been added? What files have been changed? What files have been deleted? Very important, because you need to know the history. Creating a SBOM, and SBOM is something I'm very passionate about, and it's a buzzword. So SBOM, or software bill of materials, everyone's like, yeah, we have an SBOM. SCA vendors have an SBOM. But again, what is that SBOM of? Is it just the open source code? Is it just part of the application? Is it an Excel spreadsheet? I have friends in the industry who go, yeah, we do SBOM too. I'm like, what is it? It's an Excel spreadsheet. We just put it together manually. Having an SBOM of the entire package is vitally important these days, and it has to be in an industry standard. How many people know what industry standards? There's really 3 that people use. 2 are the bigger ones, one's a little lesser. Anybody know the industry standards? Cyclone DX, SPDX, and then to a lesser extent, SWID. Those are recognized, and the executive order and falling on memorandum, if you want to sell to the federal government going forward, they highly, highly, highly suggest you provide an SBOM for every release of your software. If you're releasing 10 times a day, which is, a good amount, how do you keep up to date with your SBOMs? You have to do the analysis of the entire package to make sure it is complete, because if you miss one thing, your SBOM is inaccurate. Tampering identification. My friend Dave Ferguson just gave a presentation on behaviors in tampering, talking about tampering of the signature itself. So it's impossible to find those things if you're just looking at the source code or the running app or the APIs. So you have to look at Devastator and not the individual Constructicons to have a comprehensive understanding of supply chain risk. Again, I'm not bashing any of these technologies. They're all great at what they were designed to do. Find vulnerabilities in source code, find vulnerabilities in a running state, find vulnerabilities in open source code, but they were never thought about malware itself. So quick query of the audience. Anybody want to put themselves out there? What is the difference between a vulnerability and malware? Anybody?
A vulnerability is just something you can exploit. Malware is something that an actual package of software can do with it or interacts with.
Exactly. A vulnerability, the best way I think to say it is a vulnerability is going outside the bounds of the intended purpose. You log in, you view some records, delete some records, log out. That's functionality, that's what it does. But if you log in a certain way, you'll be able to see other people's records. That's a vulnerability. Malware is just designed to be a badass dude. Its only purpose was to be bad and be malicious. That's why the definition of malware is malicious software. It was designed to do bad things. And a lot of these things that you're looking at in terms of AST tooling are looking for vulnerabilities. They're not looking for malware itself. So let's keep going here. If you don't know what to look for, you won't find it. Who's our volleyball friend here? Anybody want? Oh, come on, you have to do it the right way. Wilson! Come on, everyone wake up. It's before lunchtime here. When you're looking for software supply chain risk, it's not as easy as grepping the code base for malware.dll. Most of the attacks, and I'm going to dig into them in the next slide or two, are novel. They're new. They've never been seen before. But they have the same DNA. They have to do the same things in order to execute themselves. It's a privilege escalation. It's a port or socket opening. It's a typo squatting of a known library by swapping out the name and tricking somebody from inserting it in there. And finding the malware is just as hard as finding the way the malware got into the application or software you're building, or consuming for that matter. So I always like to say it's the how and the what. And we're going to jump into the how and the what here shortly. So this is my buddy Sully from Monsters, Inc. He is the monster in your software supply chain. He is going to go through some examples here at a high level. And think about that AST tooling, the vulnerabilities that you're finding with those different AST tooling vendors. 3CX is probably the most recent software supply chain attack. It was tampering of the package itself at signage. It was an officially signed package, but the malware was inserted at that signage and nobody knew it was. I mean, they tested the package. They couldn't really figure out what was going on. They got alerts from their customers that something was off. It's that research. It's the how. How did that get in there? And the way you have to think about how is through tampering. It's through insertion of malware in the build environment, insertion into a developer's desktop through a code repo. Sunburst or SolarWinds, the vulnerability here is the malware, the hackers actually gained access to the MS build environment of SolarWinds Orion software and just inserted the malware directly into the build environment. Way towards that middle, that inflection point of the sideways hourglass. So even if you did testing at the developer desktop, testing of your code repos, testing of your binary repos, testing of your open source repos, you would have never found that piece of malware because it happened so late and it was just inserted directly into the build itself and compiled as part of the package. And one of the reasons why nation state and just general hackers are doing this, it's a longer con. It takes longer to compromise a piece of software that's being built, but it's much more effective in terms of the distribution process. So think about it this way. Somebody could try and hack everyone in this room, get your PII data, your social security number, your birthday, your address, where you went to college, all this type of stuff. Or you could basically hack the software that everybody uses, maybe your banking app or your online shopping app, and now everybody is compromised. SolarWinds affected 18,000 unique users or companies just by compromising one package or one piece of software, rather than having to go out and do the manual process of 18,000 individual hacking activities. CodeCov is another software supply chain attack. I call this, and the analogy I have here is how many people watched The Americans? Anybody remember the Americans, the sleeper cell Russian spies that lived among us in DC? This is very similar. In that show, a lot of times they would put a bug on a phone. Again, this is the 80s that we're talking about here. Bug on a phone or a bug on a terminal or something like that to gain access to important government information. Well, in CodeCov, that's what happened in kind of the same way. A developer's desktop environment was compromised, their credentials were compromised, and somebody was able to just insert malware directly into the code repo. So we've had three major types of attacks with SolarWinds, well, not with SolarWinds, with software supply chain attacks, and they've all gone through different processes. They've all been different in terms of how they've been rolled out. And the last one too is now we're going to actually go to another lens of risk. It's not just the software itself, it's the tooling that is controlling the build of your software. And Circle CI had a software supply chain attack where the platform itself, the CI orchestration platform of Circle CI, was compromised, and it compromised secrets. And what secrets are, and people talk about secrets, I always like to give a really stupid example, is it's a key and a lock. You want to get something, you have to unlock it. And if your secrets are compromised, your customer's PII data, your financial information, your trade secrets are all open if those secrets are compromised. So 4 very, very high profile software supply chain attacks, all very different in terms of the how, but at the end of the day, the what is the same. Malware or malware compromising software got into the software and got itself out there in a way that was not expected. But going back to the Devastator slide, even if you had the most robust application security testing program in the world, you would have not found these things. It's that final exam you need to think about in software supply chain to test what you're delivering to your customers or to your clients in a way that is secure. A lot of times too, people think like, well, I don't really write any software, I just consume software. You know, everybody's a software company. You're either a creator or a consumer of software. How many people just automatically update their software they're using, whether it's the FedEx shipping app or the Orion software for IT management or your cloud security posture management software? They're saying, hey, update that, you need to go to version 1.2. How do you know? You're taking the word of the developer of the software that it is secure. And I don't know if people have gone through questionnaires when they purchase software. Has anybody they send out the security questionnaire and it comes back like, yeah, we kind of do a good job, but we really think our software's crap, it's not secure. Nobody's ever going to say that. So you need to do your own diligence. You can't trust people anymore because this is the new lens of risk, is supply chain risk, of how that software is created and how it's being distributed. And don't trust those security questionnaires anymore because, again, nobody's going to call their baby ugly. So if we think about software supply chain risk you need to solve, it's really into 4 areas. The first one is the risk in compliance area. I mentioned this previously is, the executive order 14028 out of the executive office talking about self-attestation, SBOM, if you want to sell to the federal government, because the federal government was one of the major entities that was compromised through the SolarWinds attack. You have to basically be able to self-attest and tell them there's no bad stuff in my application. A lot easier said than done. The other is NIST, and NIST has the new standards out there for secure software development frameworks, what you're supposed to do. Again, it's just guidelines though. You have to do the right things yourself. You can't rely on documents to basically make your software secure. During that software dev release process, open source repos are a huge source of risk. But they're not the only source of risk. Whether you're talking about NPM or PyPy or GitHub, typo squatting, very simplistic attack. How many people know what typo squatting is? Yep. I mean, it sounds really stupid, but it works, and it's shown to work. I actually did a Glassboard video talking about it, just changing one letter, and you're trying to go fast and get that next package out there, and you think, I always used an example of Matt with 2 T's, or Matt with 1 T, or Matt with 2 A's. Sometimes you grab the wrong thing. Error is human. The tooling itself, which is the example from Circle CI, the tooling itself could be compromised and secrets compromised. So as you're building the software, things are coming in ways that are unexpected. Release composition and dependency analysis. One of the biggest things is dependency. Nobody likes to reinvent the wheel. They like to use open source. They like to use third-party code or COTS code as part of their process. But what do those pieces of software use and inherit? And are they reachable in terms of that vulnerable package is now an issue for me? I always like to say when good packages go bad, we'll go back to Log4j, and thinking about Log4j it was a fine package. And the analogy I always give there is, do you have, Log4j was Walter White, the minor-mannered chemistry teacher that became Heisenberg, the drug dealer. That's exactly what happened with Log4j. Everybody used it because it was totally acceptable. It wasn't an issue. But all of a sudden it is an issue, and you don't know where to look for it. So having that ability to understand where it exists, because I had people that were in war rooms for days trying to find every instance of the right version of Log4j. And then automate software supply chain security as part of that CI/CD pipeline. Totally transparent. If you cannot automate any application security testing tool, whether it's SAST or SCA, it's going to fail. It has to be part of your CI/CD process, and it has to be transparent to the process and complement the process. Because if it doesn't do that, if it's a manual step and more work, you're going to have pushback from development teams, from product managers, from architects. So it has to be seamlessly integrated. The one thing I haven't really hit on is the IT software and procurement. It's not just about developing the software, it's that questionnaire. When you're consuming software, are you going through the process to vet it that there isn't malware in there? Because just taking someone's word for it is the hope of the hackers that are trying to compromise supply chains. They're just hoping, hey, I have a great relationship with Microsoft or Adobe or my bank. I'm just going to trust their update. That's what the people that are trying to leverage software supply chain attacks are trying to do. They're trying to get on that trust so you're not looking for the issues. And software, again, is fallible. It's always being updated. People just don't realize that a lot of times an upgrade is, an update from 1.1 to 1.2, version 1.1 to 1.2 is fixing bugs, fixing things that are wrong functionally and in a security lens. So as you're thinking about third-party risk management, you not only have to look at what you're developing, but what you're consuming. And then even if you're thinking about M&A, you're looking to acquire a company, without doing proper vetting of what you're buying, now it's your potential ugly baby that you're responsible for and could put your reputation at risk. And then one of the things that everybody drives towards is remediation. A lot of people are great at identification. We found all this stuff. We have thousands of things we found. What is the process for remediation or research? And that's why if you take the information of reverse engineering the package, knowing about, is there known malware? What are the behaviors? What are the differences between one release to the other? Are there tampering issues? Are there secrets compromised? You can take all that information and allow your SOC analysts to do a deeper dive and research into the issue itself. And again, if you're just basing software supply chain security on AST tooling, you're going to be exposed. It is a false sense of security and something I'm very passionate about. That's why I've been on a crazy magical mystery tour speaking for the past 5 weeks about it. So, food for thought, when you look for supply chain risk, you always have to think about what is the intel behind a product. Whether it's a SaaS vendor or a DaaS vendor, there's always rules, checkers, queries. It's the intel that allows you to find things. And if you don't have a reputational database of malware that you can reference and enrich the information with, you're going to miss things. And you need to basically be able to be at speed and scale as part of that CI/CD automation and integration. So thinking about large packages, sometimes software packages are multi-gig, many different languages. You have to be comprehensive in the approach, because if you're not scanning it from a software supply chain risk because it's too big or it's not a language you're supported, you're not going to be secure. So pause there. Just before I jump to the next one, because I'm giving everybody a homework assignment, and I know I'm the barrier between lunch. How many people are concerned about software supply chain risk today? Is it for the apps you're developing? Raise your hands. What about the apps you're consuming? So it's about 50-50. So I always say that software supply chain is everyone's problem, because last time I checked, you're either creating software and applications or you're consuming them. Every company is a technology company, and you cannot exist without software and applications. But if those software and applications that are the foundational tool, program, whatever it is to run your business, if that's compromised, your business is going to be impacted, whether financially, reputationally, or just not knowing what the trust level is between you and your vendors. So I know it's Friday. I know it's the end, coming up on the end of LASCON. This is our Game of Thrones, so I put a Game of Thrones reference in here. Brace yourself, because homework is coming. Go look at all the collateral, white papers, blogs from your AST tooling providers. And I'm not bashing them, they're all great. They were all designed to do a certain thing. But if you look at, I'll just throw some names out there. And again, some of these I've worked for, I'm very passionate. Veracode or Checkmarks or SNCC or Contrast. Scan their papers for malware. Scan their website for malware. You won't find it. And really what software supply chain risk is malware inserted into your applications that you're developing or consuming, causing a compromise. It's not just about securing and updating the vulnerabilities, it's about identifying the how and the what, which is the malware, and being ready for that next novel attack of malware within your software development processes. So that was the presentation. I don't like to bore. I'm totally open for questions. Anybody have any questions, comments? If you want to throw fruit at me, please make sure it's nice and rotten, because it's been a long couple weeks. So any questions, comments? If you don't want to do it in front of the audience, please, I'm going to be here for a couple minutes. I can take your questions in more of a private setting. But thank you, everybody, for coming.